So let's kick off this explainer with a pretty massive question. Why do so many strategic plans completely fail to actually solve business problems? I mean, you see it all the time, right? Management teams spend weeks drafting these massive documents, filling up whiteboards with incredibly complex charts, and at the end of the day, the only thing that actually changes is the amount of coffee they consumed. The strategy looks amazing on paper, but it falls completely flat in reality. Why exactly does that happen?
Well, the core issue really boils down to this. Strategy without application is just a list. And whether you're sitting in a high-stakes boardroom advising a CEO, or you're sitting down for the ACCA SBL exam, lists don't get marks. They just don't. They don't drive revenue, and they definitely don't fix operational nightmares. Simply naming a bunch of business frameworks is frankly entirely useless if you can't apply them to the specific, messy facts of the scenario that's right in front of you.
So, welcome to your Strategic Analyst's Playbook. In this explainer, we're going to completely transform rote memorization into the actual commercial acumen you need to drive high-level consulting action. We're going to look closely at the examiner's absolute favorite strategic analysis tools, but more importantly, we're going to focus on exactly how you apply them to grab those crucial professional skills marks and pass with a distinction.
Here's your toolkit inventory for today. First, PESTEL analysis. Second, Porter's 5 forces. Third, SWOT synthesis. And finally, value chain analysis. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. PESTEL analysis, scanning the macro environment.
Now, in the real world and, especially in the exam, you're going to be handed an industry report or a news article. Your job is not to define PESTEL. Your job is to spot which of these specific trends, political, economic, social, technological, environmental, or legal, are currently affecting the business. You can't control these external factors, but the company's survival depends entirely on how management adapts to them.
So the absolutely crucial point here is how you structure your response. This 3-step flow, this is your golden formula. Step 1, extract the external factor or trend directly from the scenario. Step 2, clearly state whether this helps or hurts the company's bottom line or its operations. And step 3, which is where you actually earn your keep, confidently recommend one specific action. Never just describe the factor. Always close the loop with an action plan.
This right here perfectly demonstrates the difference between failing and passing. A bad application is super generic, something like, inflation is rising. That textbook answer? It gets 0 marks. A good application, on the other hand, links a scenario fact directly to a commercial action. Rising inflation increases borrowing costs, reducing our cash flow, so we must hedge or negotiate long-term contracts. You see the difference there? You're proving your professional skill by showing management exactly what to do about the threat.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Porter's 5 forces, industry rivalry.
Zooming in slightly from the macroeconomy, these 5 forces dictate exactly how brutal your industry is. You've got to diagnose the threat level of each one using the facts from your scenario. For example, if the scenario mentions that there are no patents required and capital costs are really low, well, you need to identify that the threat of new entrants is dangerously high, which is inevitably going to pressure prices down.
I really want you to remember this quote. 5 forces tell you if an industry is worth entering or leaving. Never just list the forces and move on. Use them to justify a strategic move. If you're a small coffee shop and you notice industry rivalry is intensely high with tons of competitors and very low differentiation, you must advise the company to focus on cost leadership or maybe build a unique loyalty program. You are building a case for a real business decision.
Okay, Section 3, SWOT synthesis, the pivot.
Now we reach the pivot of our playbook. A super common trap here is simply listing 20 items. 5 strengths, 5 weaknesses, and so on. But remember, we're analysts. We're not just note takers. A SWOT without cross-matching is just a list. And say it with me, lists don't get marks. We absolutely have to synthesize.
First off, you cannot confuse your categories. You must clearly separate the internal capabilities of the firm, like a strong brand or a clunky old IT system, from the external environmental factors, like a growing online market or the threat of cyber attacks. Internal is what you have, external is what is happening around you.
And here is where the magic actually happens. Actually, scratch that. It's not magic. It's just good strategy. You cross-match. If the scenario says you have a strong brand, a strength, and there's a growing online market, an opportunity, you pair them up to recommend an aggressive e-commerce launch. Conversely, if you recognize your weakness is an old IT system while facing external cyber threats, you've got to recommend a defensive strategy to heavily invest in cybersecurity.
That is exactly how you turn basic observations into a strategic roadmap.
All right, Section 4, Value Chain Analysis Inside Operations.
Finally, we're zooming all the way down into the company's internal operations to see exactly how things are running. You've got to break the company down into these specific primary and support activities. But listen, don't evaluate all of them. Pick 2 or 3 that are specifically mentioned in the scenario. For instance, if the scenario is talking about warehouse delays, you focus right in on inbound logistics. You must state whether that specific activity is a weakness or a strength based directly on the facts you were provided.
This right here is your one-line trigger for the exam and the boardroom. Find where value is added or wasted. The value chain basically finds the leaks in your profit bucket. If inbound logistics is weak because of high inventory holding costs and frequent stockouts, you step up and recommend an action, like implementing a just-in-time inventory system to fix it. Find the leak and recommend the patch.
And that brings us to Section 5, From Analysis to Action.
As we wrap up this explainer, we have to remember the ultimate goal of the SBL examiner, and frankly any CEO you're going to advise. Frameworks are completely useless unless they lead to a specific, balanced, and justified strategic recommendation that actually drives the business forward. You've got to evaluate the pros and the cons. You have to ask yourself, okay, what does this actually mean for the company? If you only list the theory, you fail. But if you demonstrate professional skills by advising, recommending, and justifying based on the scenario facts, you're going to excel.
You've got the Strategic Analyst Playbook in your hands now. The frameworks, they're just the lenses. Your judgment is the real tool here. So, the final question is this. When you face your next big scenario, are you just going to be another note-taker listing out theories? Or will you be the strategist who actually saves the company?